morning, guys. Good afternoon. This is Mr. Benitez. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're already in our fourth week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in your work. Thank you guys for coming to my office hours, for messaging me, and for just trying to get help to get your work done. This week, we're going to be covering Unit 4. Unit 4 is all about political boundaries and political geography. So we're going to figure out what does it mean to be a political entity, how and why they are formed. Before you guys begin this watching this PowerPoint, I need you guys to take a look at the PDN. Make sure you get ready. This is the objective. We need for this lesson, we need to figure out what are the different types of political entities. We need to figure out why our world is shaped the way it is politically, and then we need to explain the concepts of centrifugal and centripetal forces that apply at a state scale. This is what I want you guys to watch. This is a 5-minute video that gives you a quick overview of what Unit 4 is all about. So here's objective number 1. We need to identify the political entities. First, there is something called a state. A state is a political unit. It has a permanent population, it has boundaries, it's recognized by other states, and it has a government and an economy. That is a state. So what are some examples? Germany, Japan, the United States, the UK, Bolivia, Ecuador, Mexico. Those are examples of states. They have boundaries, they have a population, they have a government, they have an economy. It's a political unit. Second, we have a nation. What's a nation? A nation is a group of people that share a lot of things in common. They share culture, they share language, they share history, they share land. All those people have that in common. And now finally, we have something called a nation state. So what can you guys infer from a nation state? You guys know what a nation is. You guys know what a nation state is. It's one state or one government that has primarily only one nation within its border. And when I say nation, I mean a group of people. A good example would be Iceland or Japan. Iceland, Japan, they have their own separate government and they only have one group of people. If you go to Japan, all you will see is many, many Japanese people. And then we have a stateless nation. So stateless means they have no government, no boundaries, no economy, but they do have a group of people, a nation. So a stateless nation is a nation that does not have sovereignty over the land where they live. Some examples are Palestinians, the Kurds, and the Baks. The Kurds, they're a group of people. They are a nation that have their own religion, their own language, their own culture, and you will find them mostly in Turkey. But these people do not have their own recognized territory. They do not have their government. They have no boundaries. They have no political power whatsoever. Next, we have something called a multinational state. So a multinational state, a great example for multinational state will be the United States. The United States is one government, but it has many groups of people, many nations. If you look in the United States, we have Hispanics, we have Africans, we have people from Europe, Asia, from all over the world that make up the United States. Finally, we have a multi-state nation. So what can we infer from a multi-state nation? This is where we have one nation, just one group of people, and they have different types of governments. For example, the Koreas, we have North and South Korea. It's one nation, which are the Korean people, and it's split up into two governments, two different states. It's more than one government. In North Korea, it's run by a communist government, and in South Korea, it is run by a democratic government. If you take a look at the top right, we have the United Kingdom, but right next to it we have Ireland. Ireland's actually split up into two governments. The South government is ruled by Catholics, and the North side of Ireland, the blue, that's run by Irish people. They are Protestants. They're a different type of Christians. The Irish people that are in the north, they side with the United Kingdom. And finally, we have something called autonomous regions. These are regions that they have their own territory and they have their own freedom. What are some good examples? Take a look. Um, if you go to China, many of the regions that surround China are autonomous. They are people that live by themselves, and China does not rule over them. Uh, a better example would be Native Americans. Native Americans that live in the United States, they have they are a nation and they have their own area, and the United States does not mess with them. They did in the past, but now the United States is leaving them be. Finally, so now we need to move on to our next topic. We need to figure out what processes have shaped the contemporary political geography. So where do all these borders come from? Who created these borders? Why are these borders the way they are? Here's one example. Colonialism and imperialism. So let me define colonialism. Colonialism is where a country, a mother country, let's say countries in Europe, they come to a new territory and they send their people to live in that area. And imperialism is where powerful countries that have money, power, and resources, they control countries from a distance. They either send their delegates or they make laws to almost boss around the countries that they are conquering. One great example will be many of the European countries that came to Africa. Some of the big European countries that took over other pieces of territory will be Britain, France, Netherlands, Belgium, and Italy. And these countries, plus many other European countries, would conquer and create colonies in Africa and Asia. They would go to these countries, they would take all their resources and take it back to their own country. And the bad thing about this is people who live in those areas were being taken advantage of, all their resources were being taken, and they were being pushed aside, while the colonizers were benefiting from all this extraction and exploitation. In all these countries, the only reason why they wanted to get resources was to build up their own country. And so in 1845, in 1884, 85, the colonizers, all the European countries at the beginning of the 19th century, got together during the Berlin Conference in Germany, and all of these states began to create boundaries all across Africa without regard to the nations or the culture or the people that already lived there. They did not care who lived there. They just wanted to create their borders that will benefit themselves. And when I'm talking about them, I'm talking about the colonizers. So then what happened to the colonies after World War II? Well, before, guys, take a look at this picture. This picture is Africa, and all of these are the ethnic groups. These are all different groups of people that live in Africa. Yes, all these people are African, but the groups that live in Africa, that many of them speak different languages, many of them look different, many of them have different religions and different customs, and many of them have different lands and different history. Just like, for example, when I say South America, we have so many types of South Americans. We have people from Central America, we have Mexico, we have people from Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, Brazil. Even though they're all located in South Africa, they all are very different. So this map just shows you how diverse Africa really is. Eventually, right after World War II, many of the European countries who fought in the war were no longer able to control Africa. They left Africa alone, they left the boundaries there, and many African ethnic groups were fighting for their independence and trying to fight for power. What's one great example? One great example would be, take a look. This is a map of all the European countries and what they conquered in Africa. But after World War II, many of these countries left Africa because they had to pay and fix their own country. Other countries that suffered a lot of heavy losses during World War II. Make sure you guys read this. This is the important main point that I need you guys to know. Many of the political boundaries that we have today were imposed on other countries. As you guys noticed earlier, once the European countries left Africa, the people who were left in power had to keep their people together, but it's very difficult to keep people together. So a lot of breaking up happens, and these are two questions I want you guys to figure out. What causes the breakup of a country? Why do countries break up? And then, what's the problem? What are the effects of imposing arbitrary boundaries which do not reflect the cultural groups living in the area? So, why do countries break up? Uh, Most likely, they break up due to cultural differences. If we have a country where there's just too much diversity, where the people don't get along, where people don't like the language, or there's two groups that are culturally different, or let's say there's two different nations in one state, then that country would try to break up. There's also political differences, as in who is in charge of the country, who has the power, and there's also economic differences. Sometimes in a nation, in a state, there could be many nations, and not all the nations are going to get the most resources or the best resources. Like, for example, if you look at the United States, for the most part, many of the minorities do not receive the same advantages as the people who have power, who have resources, and make up most of the majority. And that can cause a country to break up. These are two important key terms that I need you guys to know. It's called centrifugal and centripetal forces, and these are terms that we use to describe uh, things that either destroy a country or bring it together. Centrifugal divides a country. Centripetal forces brings people together. Make sure you guys read the examples. So then, what happens when? So what happened right after World War II? Uh, Many of the European countries left, so a lot of the African ethnic groups that lived in Africa they themselves began to fight for control, fight for power, fight for stability. So there was a lot of civil wars occurring right after World War II. One great example is Rwanda. Rwanda, they finally gained their independence when Belgium left. But then this left two groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis. These two groups fought against each other, and about 1 million people died. The Hutus actually killed the Tutsis, and this was a genocide. If you guys remember, we watched a movie called Hotel Rwanda. And just to reiterate, a genocide is an organized killing of a people which are targeted because of their race, religion, ethnicity, or nationality. In this case, the Hutus disliked the Tutsis because the Tutsis and the people from Belgium had close connections. They helped each other out. and they always disregarded the Hutus. The Hutus had beef. The Hutus did not like the history between the Tutsis, so they took advantage. They wanted to be in control. They wanted power. They wanted some representations. They were tired that the Tutsis were always in control. So finally, they took advantage and they decided to target the Tutsis since the Belgians were no longer there to back them up. Rwanda is an African uh, state where we had two different groups, two different nations that did not like each other, so they fought against each other. Other than that, guys, this is one of the problems when we have countries that come into an area. They try to put their own borders and they do not care about the history. They do not care about who who in that country benefits, but for themselves. I want you guys to review the PowerPoint, watch the video, and complete the FRQ. And this will be due Tuesday, 9 in the morning. If you guys have any questions about the FRQ, make sure you log into office hours at 2 o'clock on Monday. Thank you, guys.